Our next guest needs no introduction. He's the Congressman from South Carolina, civil rights leader, a legislator with many hats. Please welcome Congressman Jim Clyburn. Thank you for joining us.
Sure. After last night, I may drop asleep in here.
Congressman, you've been a leader in the party through everything that has happened in Democratic politics since the 60s. You also taught high school history. Where do you put this moment in politics in historical perspective?
Well, thank you very much for having me, and thanks to all of you for being here. I put this moment very squarely in the presidential election of 1876, at the year that we were celebrating the 100th anniversary of this great country, and it is a great country. In no need of being made great. We got to figure out how to make that greatness accessible and affordable for all of its citizens, and that's what this is all about. In 2 years, we're going to celebrate the 250th anniversary of this country. And people who say that we've never been here before or nothing has been like this before, they just don't know the country's history. What was going on January 6th was an attempt to get the president's election into the House of Representatives, which is exactly what happened in 1876. And they knew the success of that. It was that president's election that led to the end of Reconstruction and to Jim Crow. And they knew that if they could get this election into the House, what you now see as Project 2025, which they've developed in the interim, was already in development. I know the history of the Heritage Foundation. I know the history very well. I used to teach high school, but I studied at the higher level. And so what they were trying to do is implement an autocracy, is what they were laying the foundation for. So that's what this is. So anybody wants to know what's going on today, Google President's Election 1876. Take a look at what happened. Those three states, Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina, had 20 electoral votes. When the election was over, and they counted the electoral votes in 1876, Rutherford B. Hayes had 165, but needed 185 to be president. Samuel Tilden had 184, needed only one more vote.
The only time.
I'm sorry?
The only time that the House has decided.
The only time this ever happened. And the anti-democratic forces succeeded in 1876. And the anti-democratic forces figured if it's happened before, it can happen again. And that's what was going on. So that's where I put this. This election, every election is important. You never hear me call this the most important election in our history, but you will find this to be the case. This is the most consequential election in this country since 1860.
President Biden yesterday gave a powerful speech. What do you see as his most important legacy?
He brought us back from the brink. There are two prongs. Well, let me put it this way. There are bookends to his presidency. Martin Luther King Jr. once wrote, many of you know, he only lived to be 39 years old. He knew he was not going to have a long life, and he wrote about that and spoke about it often. And he said on one occasion, it matters not how long you live, but how well you live. And I think that we should think about that in terms of President Joe Biden. He may not get as long a presidency as he set out, but he will have, in history, one of the most productive presidencies ever. He'll be right up there with Franklin Roosevelt, Lyndon Baines Johnson, and I think he'll be in the top three when it comes to production. Now, the problem, I think, is this. Bookend his election. Let's bookend his service. on the one end, vice president to the first African-American president of the United States. He becomes president. He picks the first woman to be vice president of the United States. He makes a decision to leave the stage and endorses what we hope will be the first woman to be president of the United States. That's the consequences of this election. We will succeed on November 5th. He will be bookended with having been vice president to the first African American and handed off to the first woman American. That's a great history that nobody will ever be able to replicate if he pulls it off.
The Congressional Black Caucus was behind President Biden until the very moment he decided he would not run again. Mm-hmm. Tell us about the root of that loyalty, and was it hard to make the switch to Harris?
Well, it was not hard to make the switch, but it is based in the record. I don't know why anybody would look at Joe Biden's record as president and not be impressed by it if you're African American. If you're anti-African American, you might have a problem with it. But if you're not anti-African American, you look at the first guy to select as his running mate, a woman of color, the first guy to put. We've had 5 women on the Supreme Court before Ketanji, and nobody's ever seriously discussed a black woman. Why was that? So he puts a black woman on the Supreme Court. Then he looks at the courts of appeals, and he puts more black women on the courts of appeal than all other presidents combined. So you just look at it from the judiciary. Then look at the legislation. Every promise he made, he kept. Now, a lot of people says, well, we didn't do the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act. Yes, we did. We passed it 3 times and sent it to the Senate. Do you blame Joe Biden for the Senate filibuster? Do you blame Joe Biden for the Supreme Court that got rid of Roe v. Wade? So he was stymied at every front by this Supreme Court. But you can't blame him for that. But he did everything he said he was going to do. The thing that gets me more than anything else is on student loan debt relief. He did everything he said he was going to do with student loan debt relief. Every time he did something, this Supreme Court was called upon to stop him. And then he even found workarounds for that. The public service debt, student loan debt relief, he did that in spite of what the Supreme Court did otherwise. So black folks knew that. You know, those who didn't get all of their information from whatever you call it, your social media might be, if you decide to look at the record, you were privy to all of that. So those of us in the Congressional Black Caucus who meet every Wednesday for lunch and discuss other things, sometimes, we eat too, but we discuss a lot of stuff. We knew what the record was. We had a part of making that record. The Rescue Act, the Infrastructure Bill, the CHIPS and Science Act, the PAC Act, Inflation Reduction Act. My late wife fought diabetes for 30 years. She was a 4-shot a day diabetic. Her insulin bill 1 month I saw was $800 for 1 month. She had good insurance. However, today, that same insulin bill, because of Joe Biden and the Inflation Reduction Act, $35. Black folks knew that. We know where diabetes lives. And so it was easy for us. And I never could understand why people says, why are y'all sticking with him? And I had some people, I sat down with some folks at a midnight meeting up in New York about 2 weeks before Joe Biden got out of the race. And they says, why are you sticking with him? I said, why shouldn't we?
Because the record speaks for it.
It speaks
for itself. You know, looking ahead, you've been a witness to Vice President Harris's career since she's been in the Senate. She went to your fish fry in 2019. What differences do you see between Senator Harris and now candidate Harris?
Senator Harris became Vice President Harris. And nobody goes to college to be vice president. You know, it's a learning curve. Joe Biden, go back and look at the first part of his vice presidency and how he ended up. Everybody was given a learning curve, but nobody wanted to give her a learning curve. And I'm sitting and I'm watching her. I've been watching her since before she got elected to the Senate. I was out in California and witnessed part of her campaign for the United States Senate, though I knew of her even before she got into elective office. So I've been watching her all this time. You know, politics is I've been doing politics since the age of 8. That's a true story. I started following politics during the 1948 presidential election. That's how I'm such a Harry Truman person. So I've been doing politics all this time. So I'm watching her. And the night she jumped on that plane and flew down to Tennessee, when those 2 young African-American boys and that one, the white woman, were denied or kicked out of the legislature, the speech she gave that night, I'm sitting there, and right in the middle of that speech, I said, she has arrived. I saw it, I felt it. And then she responded to Dobbs. I said, she's cooking.
Yep.
You know, so it was easy for me. And so we stuck with Joe Biden. And when Joe Biden decided to leave the stage, he called me, read me his statement right around 1 o'clock. I will never forget it because it was my 45th anniversary of my 39th birthday.
Happy belated birthday.
July 21st, my birthday, is when I got that call. And when I got that call, he read me a statement, and he says, and I told him there was a little thing missing out of the statement. And he asked me what it was. I said, you can't leave the stage not endorsing. He said, I will put out a second statement within the hour. And when that second statement came out at 1:46, at 1:47, I was on the phone. And I roped in my little kitchen cabinet. I said, we are all in for Kamala. So we had been studying her for a long time. We knew she was ready. A lot of people missed this. You remember when the United States of America got in trouble over the so-called submarine deal with Australia and what it did with our relationship with France? Who did Joe Biden send to France? Kamala went. She resolved that issue. And we hadn't heard a mumbling word since. She has arrived. She's ready for this.
I'm going to get in trouble for asking another question, but this one's important. What is her responsibility if she wins to people of color all across the country to feel seen, to feel heard, and to be represented?
Do the things that are necessary, proposals, policy, legislation, to make the greatness of this country accessible and affordable for all of its citizens. Education. What do we need to do to make education accessible and affordable? I don't care what it is. Housing. How do we go about making it accessible and affordable? There are a lot of things in this country that are accessible and not affordable. And there are a lot of things that are affordable and not accessible. So that's how you balance this. And I've had these discussions with her, like I've had them with Joe, and I go all the way back to Bill Clinton with these kinds of discussions. And so you will see, well, let's take the infrastructure bill. When we passed the infrastructure bill, everybody was talking about roads and bridges and water and sewage and all that kind of stuff. I sat down with a group of about 20 people. Tim was one of them who I'm going to be meet with his Vermont delegation tomorrow. And I said to them, I said, how many of you remember what we call the internet when it first came online? I don't know how many of you remember it. We call it the information highway. That's what it was called. And I said to those 20 members that day, we are not going to let an infrastructure bill go out of this House unless we treat the information highway the same way we treat the interstate highway. Because that's how you make telemedicine available and affordable, through the internet. This education. What happened when we had COVID-19? The kids that got left out because they did not have the internet at home. The kids who had the internet at home, like my granddaughter, she was fine. She had a classmate, a good friend, that couldn't pass the proficiency exams that got back because she didn't have the internet at home. So these are the kinds of things we have to apply to everything. She's going to do that. And she will be building upon what this administration has done in a real good way.
Congressman Clyburn, thank you so much for joining us.
Well,
We so appreciate
thank you all so much for having me.